Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Living an Orgasmic Life, Heal Yourself and Awaken Your Pleasure by Xanet Pailet. Foreword by Emily Morse. Narrated by Xanet Pailet. Publisher's note: this audiobook includes bonus material. Please visit tantor.com and type Living an Orgasmic Life into the search box. Follow the link to the book's page, then, under the supplemental content section, please enter the access code POTENTIAL, and then click the unlock button to access the bonus material. The code should be entered in all lowercase letters. Disclaimer. This book is partially a memoir in which I have tried to recreate events, locales, and conversations from my memory. However, to protect people's privacy and anonymity, I have changed many identifying characteristics and details, such as names, places, and occupations. Individuals named in client stories are composite characters gleaned from the hundreds of women and men who I have worked with. This book is not intended as a substitute for the medical advice of physicians. The listener should regularly consult a healthcare provider in matters relating to his or her health, and particularly with respect to any symptoms that may require diagnosis or medical attention. Foreword. I was sitting alone on a break during the first week of our Somatica Sex and Intimacy training program, putting out fires in my office and completely absorbed on my laptop. A woman came up to me and said, "Oh my God, you're Emily Morse. I have your Kegel app on my phone, and I recommend it to all my holistic pelvic care clients. I am so excited to meet you." That afternoon, Xanet and I spent an hour talking about holistic pelvic care. I quickly realized that this woman had a depth of knowledge, skills, and life experience about sexual healing and awakening that set her apart from many sex educators, coaches, and experts. After all, having lived in a sexless marriage for 25 years gives her a lot of street cred. Although relatively new to the field, Xanet is the real deal, and this book will prove it to you. When I first read Living an Orgasmic Life in preparation for a Sex with Emily podcast with Xanet, I was surprised by how much I related to her personal story. Like Xanet, I grew up very disconnected from my body and sexuality. For many years, it was hard for me to experience pleasure and orgasms. I also struggled with intimacy and not having a good role model for what a healthy relationship should look like. Feeling confused around sexuality is a state of mind I can relate to because I hear it all the time from my listeners. So many women struggle with sexless marriages, painful intercourse, inability to experience orgasm, and low libido. Not only does Xanet address all these issues in this book, but she provides a vast array of exercises and tools to help women find or reclaim their pleasure. What I love the most about this book is the way in which Xanet masterfully weaves in her own story in such a vulnerable way. She makes it completely relatable to every woman's experience and provides all of us a path forward to living an orgasmic life. While there are many words of wisdom in this book, I want to leave you with this concept. Xanet talks about a woman's pelvic bowl, uterus, ovaries, vagina, as her second heart and second brain, the source of tremendous love and wisdom and the gateway to orgasmic life energy. Living an orgasmic life is born from this place of birth and rebirth, and I can already tell how profoundly this book will impact women and help us reconnect our sexuality to our emotions, body, and our pleasure. I am honored and delighted to be part of this book's orgasmic birth and to call Xanet a colleague and a friend. Dr. Emily Morse, founder and host of Sex with Emily. Introduction. The concept of an orgasmic life first appeared on the vision board I created 5 years ago when I started my business, The Power of Pleasure, after having just left a 2-decade-long sexless marriage. To me, living an orgasmic life means that you are living a life that flows easily, without struggle, just like how an orgasm happens. What I learned on my journey of sexual healing and awakening is that sexuality is at the core of our being. It is powerful beyond words. Not only can it help us achieve a state of sexual bliss, but it can also alter the course of our entire life. Dynamic personal growth and transformation are available when a woman fully connects with her sexuality and orgasmic potential. When this happens, she will inevitably experience a flood of new life force energy and a surge of creativity. The result is typically a profound shift in her intimate life that ripples out into every part of her world. In the pages that follow, I will share my story and the stories of other women and men who have made this surprising transformation. Read with an open heart, and you will begin to feel the vital flame of your sexuality begin to flicker. In each chapter, I will share essential lessons that can take your sex life from ho-hum or non-existent to fulfilling on every level. You will learn a practical approach that is simple but not always easy. Through a process of inquiry and self-reflection, coupled with self-directed activities, you will discover the many factors that cause women to shut down their sexuality, why it's so hard to talk about sex in a world where everything is about sex, the number one reason women lose their desire for sex and what to do about it, how sexual trauma can occur and how to heal it, your sexual blueprint, what it is and how to read it, how attachment theory relates to your intimate life, what the journey to sexual healing looks like, how to find your path to pleasure, awakening your body through somatic and hands-on healing, how to reignite your libido, the truth about your pleasure potential, what you can do to start living an orgasmic life in the bedroom and beyond. If I could transform my sex life at the age of 50, I know for certain that you can as well, whether you are 25 or 65. If you feel broken or disconnected from your sexual self, find yourself avoiding lovemaking, or can't sustain intimacy, this book will help you reclaim your sexuality and move toward living an orgasmic life. Welcome to the journey. A note about terminology. For many women, what we call our sexual body parts is a charged subject. I recently had a woman walk out of one of my classes when I used the word pussy. And while Donald Trump's sadly derisive use of the term during his 2016 presidential campaign made pussy a household word, it still makes many women uncomfortable. There are many words for vagina and penis from which to choose, and what is offensive to one woman may be endearing to another. I use words for sexual body parts interchangeably to help you see that a word is just a word. It's the connotation, belief system, and socialization that make words feel charged. Here are some of the words for female and male genitalia I will use in this book: vagina and vulva, pussy, yoni, penis, cock, lingam. I encourage you to add to this list all the names you've heard, read, or used for vaginas and penises, including nicknames that you may have for your own or your partner's body parts. Then pick the ones that you like and start using them. For my LGBTQ friends, the nature of this book that recounts my own heteronormative relationships, as well as client case studies involving my client population, requires me to delve into the differences between cisgender men and women when it comes to intimacy and sexuality. I have tried to use gender-neutral terms wherever possible. For example, partner rather than wife or husband, or boyfriend, girlfriend. I hope that you will find much of the information in this book useful in examining your own relationships and sexuality, regardless of the genders of the subjects. Part 1. Healing yourself from shame, sexual abuse, and physical trauma. Chapter 1. One night can change your life. At 35 years of age, I absolutely hated sex. Everything about it was painful. Intercourse just plain hurt. And I'd landed in the doctor's office with female problems more times than I could count. Just thinking about sex was stressful. Talking about it was impossible. So, like many couples, my husband and I simply stopped having sex. If you had told me that I'd be having multiple orgasms, ejaculating, and riding hour-long waves of orgasmic pleasure in my 50s, I would have said, "You must be on drugs." How does a woman who has lost all interest in sex and whose libido has been in a decades-long slumber wake up to discover the delights of lovemaking, reclaim her sexuality, and begin to live an orgasmic life? It all started from a chance encounter on OkCupid, an online dating site where I met Eric, also known as Tantor Man. Eric offered me an experience that changed the course of my life. It was a hot summer night in Midtown Manhattan. When Eric welcomed me into his apartment, I smiled, breathing in the sweet smell of rose hips. He'd invited me over for a relaxed Sunday evening, promising a big surprise. He was an excellent cook and had made us dinner a couple of times before, so I assumed the surprise was a special menu. Over the previous 3 days, I'd been musing about what might be in store, but he wasn't wearing his chef apron and designer jeans per usual. In fact, his attire was downright unusual. He was wearing nothing but a sarong, a body-length, multicolored scarf tied around his waist. I was startled and a wee bit tongue-tied at first. I'd never seen anyone wear a sarong in New York, but managed to untie my tongue and ask, with just a hint of sarcasm, "So that's my surprise? We're going to Maui?" He smiled, said, "No," and with a sweep of his arm, led me into the apartment, which was rather warm. I decided he must have chosen the sarong due to the heat and felt myself relax. He directed me toward his beautiful leather sofa, and I sat down. He placed a lovely tray of cheese, nuts, crudités, and crackers on the coffee table, along with an expensive bottle of red wine. I thought. This, too, was a break from his usual behavior. He'd never served appetizers before. What in the world did he have in mind? I'd met Eric several months earlier on OkCupid. When we first crossed paths, he was recently separated from his wife of many years. I found him to be incredibly needy, even clingy, and sexually aggressive in a way that really turned me off. Our relationship, such as it was, had been rather rocky. We'd broken up a couple of times over the first few months. He really hadn't a clue how to treat a woman, but he was extremely smart, interesting to talk to, and a successful businessman. We were so well matched intellectually that I stayed in the game. Not in a gazillion years would I have guessed he'd be the man to change the game for me entirely. Eric sat down on the couch a good foot and a half away from me. I was thankful for the space and once again noted this break from his usual behavior. In fact, he was displaying none of his typical neediness, which gave me a chance to feel a desire for closeness I'd never felt around him before. He spread some soft goat cheese on a cracker and handed it to me. "Please have some." I accepted and looked into his eyes. But I couldn't find the words to wonder aloud about the big surprise, so I simply said, "Thank you." I was completely certain that he'd read the quizzical look on my face. He smiled, moved about 2 inches closer to me on the couch, reached for some cashews, and turned his body to face me directly. "I suppose you're wondering what's going on," he said. "Well, I spent the last 2 days in a workshop with a Tantra master." I didn't have a frame of reference for a Tantra master, so I just nodded and waited for him to say more. As he began to share his experience, I noticed that his demeanor was completely different than how I'd experienced him before. He was confident, kind, and loving, and his passion for this Tantra thing was so intoxicating that I barely heard a word he said. Nonetheless, as he continued to speak, I found myself leaning in, hoping to understand what he was saying. The really intriguing thing about Tantra, he said, is the focus on worshiping the goddess. Again, I didn't have a frame of reference other than the small, big-bellied figurines I'd seen in a book about ancient matriarchal societies. He moved back a little away from me and seemed to be taking my temperature on this idea, then said, I was thinking we could dedicate this evening to goddess worship. Unsure of the meaning of this proposal, I said, I'm not sure what you mean. Goddess worship? He explained that the workshop with the Tantra master had opened his eyes to a whole new world, a world he wanted to share with me if I was willing. He described it as a world that would involve all of my senses, a world in which I would be the focus of his attention, a world where he would put his sexual desire aside and focus solely on my pleasure. I simply want to worship you as the embodiment of the goddess. I stammered, looked around the room for a place to hide, battled my urge to race out the door, and finally convinced myself that it couldn't hurt. I could always get up and leave if this goddess worship thing turned into yet another failed romantic attempt. I suppose, I said, what do you want me to do? He smiled, picked up his iPad, and put on what he called his new Tantra playlist. Then, for the first time since I'd stepped through the door, he moved close, touched my knee, and said, You just sit there and enjoy the music. Have some cheese and nuts. I'm going to draw you a bath. That first night of goddess worship was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I literally just lay on his bed and allowed myself to be pleasured with no expectations. I did not have crazy screaming orgasms. Those came later. But I did experience my body in a way I never had before. I didn't know I was capable of experiencing such an immense amount of pleasure. And the connection I felt to my sexuality was completely new to me. That night was the beginning of a wondrous journey. I had a long road ahead of me, but that night lit a flame in my belly and gave me a mountain of hope. I did not have to be a broken woman forever. Chapter 2. Living a Life of Lies. What if I told you that no matter your age, the best sex of your life is ahead of you? How would your life be different if you started having the most amazing sex of your life in the months and years ahead? I'm talking about mind-blowing, oh my God, what the fuck was that kind of sex? You can have orgasms that make you think you have died and gone to heaven. Orgasms that rock your entire body. Orgasms you feel from the tips of your toes to the top of your head. Orgasms that last not just for minutes, but for hours. Orgasms that make you scream and moan and that take you out of your body into blissful dimensions previously unknown. This is the potential of your sexuality. With extended orgasm, your biochemistry changes completely. It's like natural LSD. Imagine feeling more pleasure in your body than you thought possible. How would it feel to be so sexually awake and alive that you can completely surrender to sensation and pleasure? This is my wish for you, to live an orgasmic life. Appearances can be deceiving. If you'd known me when I was 40 years old, it's quite likely you would have thought that I was already living an orgasmic life. I turned my background in healthcare law into a very successful healthcare consulting business in New York City. I lived in a gorgeous apartment on the Upper West Side with my husband of 20 years and my 2 amazing boys. I oversaw a complete gutting and renovation of our New York apartment, personally selecting every piece of wood, granite, stone, and platinum. I was certain we would live there for the rest of our lives and that one of our boys would inherit the place. I was living the life with all the material trappings that went along with it. My kids went to the best schools in the city. We frequented the finest restaurants, took amazing vacations, and attended premier Broadway openings and events. And yet, I knew deep inside that there was something missing in my life. It was actually my oldest son's theatrical talent that had brought us from the D.C. suburbs to New York City. At age 11, he was cast in the Broadway production of The Sound of Music. Our move to New York opened up a whole new world to our family. Little did we know that we had a musical genius on our hands. By age 13, he was writing and composing music at such a high level that Stephen Schwartz, the composer of the hit musical Wicked, agreed to be his mentor. I often joke that it was the letter of recommendation from Schwartz that got my son into Yale. Although my husband was a successful lawyer at a big-time New York firm, he was miserably unhappy with his work. But he was so inspired by our son's musical genius that his creativity was sparked. In the blink of an eye, he and my eldest became a father-son writing team in the highly competitive world of musical theater. In time, and due to my son's involvement in the theater world, I became a theater producer. I supported many musicals both on and off Broadway and produced 5 Broadway musicals, including How the Grinch Stole Christmas. I even made theatrical history by having one of my shows nominated for 12 Tony Awards and not win a single one. Tony-nominated theater producer, thriving business owner, mother of 2 awesome boys, wife of a successful lawyer, founder of a theater production company. As you can imagine, those on the outside looking in thought I was living a fairy tale life. But as we all know, looks can be deceiving. The widening divide. What my friends and family did not know was that my husband and I had stopped having sex when I was 32, a few years after our second son was born. As often happens with couples who lose their physical relationship, we also began to lose any intimacy in our life. Our goodnight cuddles started to fade away, as did kissing, with the exception of a peck on the lips. The passion we had for each other when we were first married was non-existent. Our king-size bed grew in dimension, and there was a dividing line down the middle. We turned away from each other at night and each slept in our own prison. It didn't help matters that my husband suffered from insomnia and that I had restless legs. Eventually, he left our bed and started sleeping in another room. By the time I left my marriage at age 50, we had been sleeping in separate beds for over 15 years. The only touch I ever received was from my children. Luckily, my youngest son was a cuddle bug. He also was extremely empathic and could sense my loneliness and the rift between his father and me. My youngest always knew when to give me a hug or put a hand on my arm, and he gave great shoulder massages. His gentle touch and presence kept me going through some very challenging times. What happened to us? There is a litany of reasons why my marriage fell apart, both external and internal. On the external side, my husband felt like our move from the D.C. area to New York City forced him into taking a high-stakes, high-pressure legal job while he was on the cusp of receiving an MBA in Maryland. He'd hoped to leave the law and go into business, and the move to New York City disrupted his plans. He felt compelled to take a high-pressure, high-paying job to support the family, and this caused him a tremendous amount of anger and resentment. Ironically, it was the New York City move that ultimately helped him find and cultivate his true passion of being a writer. Our family theater producing business put a tremendous amount of stress on the marriage and the family. Overnight, my husband and teenage son's work received a lot of attention in the theatrical community. As their talent became more recognized, what was once a fun sideline activity became serious. The stakes for each new musical were very high. It was excruciating for all of us to experience the ups and inevitable downs that go with the creation of new work. But the worst part was the role that I played as a theater producer. It is immensely challenging to shepherd a new writer through the insular world of theater. There is a lot of frustration along the way. No matter how brilliant, a new work that doesn't have an A-level production team rarely finds its way to Broadway. The fact that the theater world was even taking their work seriously is a true testament to how talented they were. But as a producer, I was a figure of authority, which complicated my other role as a supportive wife and mother. It intensified the strain on my marriage, which was already veering out of control. It created a tremendous amount of tension, and our conversations were fraught with anger and resentment. We were doomed from the start. In hindsight, I can now see all of the internal issues that doomed our marriage from the beginning. Like so many young lovers, we saw in each other a chance to correct mistakes from generations past, but actually just reinforce familiar negative behavior patterns. For example, my widowed mother had taught me that love was about grief and pain. No surprise then that I chose to marry a man who was in deep grief over a recent tragic event in his life. I sought comfort in the familiar, and eventually, our marriage became a source of grief for both of us. But I believe our issues could have been overcome. We might still be married today, but for the fact that our sex life was completely non-existent. Without that physical connection, what was left of our marriage was a business arrangement. We were partners in the business of raising children, partners in the theater business, but we were not partners in life. When I think about the trajectory of the demise of my sex life, I sometimes wonder, what came first, the loss of attraction between my husband and me, or my lack of interest in sex? In all fairness to my husband, I was not an easy woman to have sex with. Sex was usually painful and uncomfortable for me. I rarely, if ever, experienced sex as pleasurable. No matter how hard my husband tried to please me, I rarely got turned on. Orgasms were not in my repertoire, except a rare, weak clitoral orgasm. Everything having to do with sex was a problem, including getting pregnant and suffering from such severe morning sickness that I was under a mandate of bed rest from the third trimester until I gave birth. I don't think it was humanly possible for me to feel sexually attracted to the person I associated with so much pain and discomfort. So we just stopped having sex. Looking back, I understand why my body would have felt completely betrayed by anything and everything having to do with sex. Of course I shut down. Of course I was relieved to stop having sex. Yet I still felt somehow broken. And then there was the guilt about denying my husband his pleasure and feeling our relationship slip away. We rarely talked about any of this. When we did, the conversations always ended in anger and tears, which created even more distance in our relationship. Finding a home in your body. At the time, I believed my situation was an anomaly. Now I know otherwise. Way too many people around the world are disconnected from their sexuality. The National Survey of Sexual Health and Behavior, conducted by Indiana University in 2009, reported that 36% of women in their 30s did not.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?